Hey, everybody. Robert Rose here. I'm the Chief Strategy Advisor with the Content Marketing Institute. I am super psyched to be talking with my friend Mark today. Mark, of course, you and I have had the chance to speak a couple of times. And you and I both share a passion for content marketing and content strategy, and as well in B2B and B2C. It's so great to get to be able to finally chat a little bit here, even if we have to do it in this very, very weird year, this
Yeah,
very
yeah,
weird separated year.
it really is. It really is. Yeah, I've been looking forward to it, Robert. I've been following a lot of your moves, from a content standpoint. CMI does a lot of good stuff. And, I was looking forward to just chatting just in general about what's going on out there in the market, kind of share some best practices, talk to you a little bit more about what you're seeing on your end, and then we can just go from there.
Yeah, well, so let's start there with the weirdness that is 2020.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we have certainly seen is in a very kind of, I guess, ironic way, is a pivot toward content, right? Toward storytelling, toward the use of great customer experiences. And it was something that we've seen coming. It's not like this change hasn't been coming for a while, but it seems like 2020 and the everything that happened this year has really accelerated it, right? And I don't know if you're seeing the same thing in some of the client work you're doing, but we've really seen an escalation in both the interest in and sort of general passion around content.
Yeah, content, in addition to the voice of the customer programs that you're talking about right now, we spend a lot of time, obviously our business is talking to marketers with marketers, helping them strategize and plan and just share best practices. Some of the areas that we're starting to see a different lift on is, voice of customer, we call it VOC, has always been, one of their top 1, 2, or 3 priorities, but they are doubling down on the voice of the customer effort. Now, whether that's due to the fact that from a revenue standpoint, they're seeing that that customer can actually carry more opportunity there, whether it's in the form of behaviors and kind of like emotional experiences that they have with their customer right now. How does then that translate to a content strategy that moves to organic growth opportunities? How do you think about cross-sell, upsell opportunities with that customer? I think that's one of the driving factors, definitely, with why marketers are doubling a little bit down on VOC. I think the second area is probably even more relevant, which is staying closer to the customer.
Yeah.
Where you're faced with everything that's happened to us, unfortunately, over the last 8 or 9 months, where some brands have seen revenue evaporate, overnight within a few months, and now it's coming back around. Marketers probably are really in tune to, I got to get really close with my customer, whether that was an ELT, executive leadership team initiative, or not. It's like, how do I get more close with them, and how do we kind of work together to make sure loyalty's in play here and make sure they're an advocate for us and they can help carry maybe a different level of value to market through content. And it's just been an interesting, approach we've seen change over, in particular, the last 8 to 9 months. To us, a better change.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's again sort of an accelerated change for sure, because the direct to consumer idea has been around for a few years. And certainly we've seen durables companies, consumer packaged goods companies, retailers,
Mhm.
and all of the accelerated changes that 2020 brought about for them, right? Sort of, you got to go pick it up from the store, you got to go order online, the e-commerce drive and all of that. But even in B2B, to your point, you're seeing a lot of direct to consumer sort of influence, right? I don't know if you see this in your client work, but what we're seeing a lot of is you've got B2B organizations that were once really focused in on a very buyer oriented, sort of enterprise buyer persona, and trying to get, sales meetings and trying to get sales enablement going and trying to get that. And they're moving more toward a influence demand. I'm old enough to remember. I won't purport your age, but I'm old enough to remember. Remember the old BASF ads, right? That you used to see on TV. We don't make the things, we make the things work better.
Yeah.
And you're seeing a little more of that these days with B2B companies. Are you seeing some of that voice of customer, sort of come through direct to consumer idea?
Oh, without a doubt. I would probably say, it was moving down that pattern anyway, prior to, I don't want to really, reference COVID so much based on what happened from March and beyond, but it was definitely moving down to the path of B2B to C, where, some of our clients that could just be driven out of infrastructure, are starting to see how they can start to tell more of a humanized story a bit through the lens of their target audience of consumer. You think about an infrastructure company that's maybe storing a bunch of data, but how do they provide accessibility and kind of real time, access to Netflix, or how do they provide real time access to, Uber and Uber Eats through their, you know what I mean, like that whole connected world right there. Well, there's foundational tools and platforms and technology in place. The brands that we're talking with now and the marketers that we share a lot of time with want to kind of tell a little bit of that story. So they're starting to get more comfortable with the C story inside of a B2B framework, which for agencies and for marketers and for content marketers is kind of a refreshing opportunity for us to really hone into storytelling. Because don't get me wrong, storytelling's always been core to everything that, marketing is about, but it just has presented us a really interesting, cool challenge.
Do you find that, it's for years, we've been in this world of how do we produce more and more and more content, right? And whether it's been driven by SEO or just demand from the organization, or whatever the sort of internal drivers of content from the content practitioners or the agency may be. Do you find that now that we've started to accelerate this idea of direct to consumer, wider remit for the content programs and the marketing programs that we have, is that exacerbating this quantity thing, or are we starting to finally get some sanity around the idea that no, we probably should reduce and get into some quality?
Absolutely. There's no question about that. One of our buddies, I'm sure, you kind of engage with Matt Hines often, just out there and some of the stuff that he puts out there. I was reading a post this morning, just in general about how pace of content is changing. How it's a good thing that we're focusing more on the quality side of things rather than the quantity. And, where marketing may have been measured in years past with the amount of content you're producing, now it's the type of content that's connecting. And I feel like marketers nowadays are slowing down to spend the right amount of energy and time in making sure that that content sticks and is valuable. They're not rolling to the next piece of content to be measured upon. They're looking at that piece of content that may be in market for a month or 2 months, and they're really figuring out a way to amplify it, curate it, and make it connect with that audience. And so what it's done for us right now is it's had us pretty much take a step back and say strategically, how do we take these really great assets that you've created as a B2B company and make sure that they are staying in market for the period of time that they should be, but they're providing value throughout the journey of the buyer and or the customer that you're engaging with. So I think it's really done, in my opinion, a remarkable job where we all can work together and not worry about producing, X hundred pieces of content a year, but rather producing, 5 to 10 and really doing a great job with getting that stuff out there and merchandising it the way it should be.
Yeah, it's funny. I love this idea, and I still see a lot of B2B organizations still struggling with this idea, right? This idea of slowing down, getting higher quality. And most of it I find, and I don't know if this is, sort of some of the, if you sort of look at, okay, how do we actually make that change, right? How do we make the change to the ideal that you're talking about there, and slowing down, getting to higher quality? Part of that, it feels like, a lot of these companies we see building these, maybe their internal content studios or their internal content teams, and they ultimately get ended up treating like the internal Kinkos, right? Where it's like, just produce, 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 produce.
Mhm.
And they're sort of the last in the chain. You know what I mean? They're sort of, integrated campaigns get created, and then they get put into the field. And then as they're put into the field, somebody goes, oh my gosh, we need content to feed that campaign. And then they ask the content people for assets. And so by the time they're getting the request and putting together some sort of calendar, it's already late, right? They're already late to market with it. And so pulling that process back, the content ideation and creation process back in the sort of early stages of integrated marketing development, getting those teams integrated seems like one of the key answers that we're seeing. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I'm going to go back, a few different things I want to mention on this topic. One is, everything that's happened with regards to movements have kind of had brands step back a little bit to make sure that because you slow down the quality or the quantity of content, you also look at the tonality of the content. There's much more sensitivity in market out there right now. So brands need to be aware of, more so than ever, what they're putting out. And is it balanced? I think that everybody's passionately behind, as we should be, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what's happening with these brands with purpose, that businesses are going to do businesses that share similar values, that employees are going to work for employers that they share similar values in. That presents a different challenge on the content side to the better, in my opinion. Okay. So I think that change has been really, really well received.
Yeah. Well, it segues nicely into something that, you've recently produced, which you've got actually numbers to back this up, right? You've got, you've done, your content fitness report, which is a brilliant piece of research, by the way. And you've actually found that these marketers are, especially in this very weird year that is 2020, have really leaned into this emotional storytelling thing and really started to focus in on the quality, maybe because of COVID, but maybe this was just a change that was waiting to happen.
Yeah, I think that it definitely was a change waiting to happen. I feel that marketers were able to kind of step back for a month or two, not stop everything on the marketing front, but really reevaluate where they're at with things and make the necessary changes to their programs and their approaches that will give them second half impact and now 2021 impact, because most of the best practices that they changed in the moment are definitely going to parlay over to next year's planning and their cycles. So there's no doubt about it that everything that's kind of happened, and you can take pace by content, Robert. We could take pace by just overall, departments and collaboration. Some of the silver lining with the work from home that's happened is productivity. You've got these cycles now to really kind of spend time looking at things differently. You know what I mean? You may not be in a car for an hour and a half in the morning and an hour in the evening. That time either translates to family and or a little bit of work, right? So I think that produces much more quality content, much more quality marketing. It gets you probably to understand your buyer so much more because you have the time to look at it a little bit differently, and you have the time to make sure you're connecting. These, I like to call it more of the personalization 4.0, like these stories that, like the emotional connection you have with them. You could sit there and see behaviors happening right in front of you on social, or how they're coming to your website and where they're going on your website and how they're downloading content and how they're engaging with you and adjust in the moment. So I don't think what's happened over the last 8 months has put an obstacle in front of agility. I think marketers have to be more agile today than probably ever before, or else they're going to face disengagement and loyalty issues. So like, you got to think about it from, as a content marketer, yeah, you're definitely responsible for top of funnel, middle of funnel, and all other things that go on into the funnel. But as you come through, as we talked about earlier with the double down of the voice of the customer, are you spending the right amount of time engaging with the customer, listening to your customer, building loyalty with the customer? You know what I mean? Like, there's other elements to content that through funnel, once you're a customer, what happens? It doesn't always have to tie to revenue. Revenue could be loyalty.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that. It's that sort of, I think one of the things that has happened this year is, it was almost an excuse, right? Because we couldn't really do the sort of more tactical, sort of obvious things that many of us in B2B and B2C, but many of us in those spaces do, which is, hey, let's teach our customers to use our product more wisely, or let's teach them how to, what the future of innovation looks like with this particular product set, or let's, the sort of very obvious things that content marketing really leaned on in the past, because we felt really squeezy about the whole market, like, this isn't the right time to be doing that. I think somebody said it really well. It's like, you don't want to teach someone about fire safety when their house is on fire, right? It's like you can't. So we ended up in these emotional stories, and all of a sudden people went, oh, they work, right?
Yeah.
This works.
Right, right.
And I was, I tell the story because it brings right back to this idea of agility that you were just talking about, which is, we were working with one very large enterprise software company. And of course, they're in the middle of, March and early April, trying to figure out what they're going to do and what they're, going to, how they're going to address this. And, they got all the senior product managers together on a Zoom call, and they got everybody together, and they're talking about, well, we're going to have to create all this content, and we're going to have to do this, and we're going to have to pivot quickly. And the head of content strategy there sort of raised her hand and said, hey, we're ready. We can do this, right? We're ready to roll.
Yeah.
Because we spent the last 8 months basically building in this agility to pivot and move and build experiences and connect them with data and, do all these things. Just say the word and we'll go.
Right.
And they did.
Yeah.
And to me, that is the new skill, right? The new skill of content and marketing in the business is, how quickly can you move from story to story, topic to topic, channel to channel? How quickly can you move independent of where sort of the atmosphere brings you these days?
No question. And emotion to emotion.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
all of
exactly.
the elements you just explained, right? So you could think about a customer, you just lock in a customer and they're onboarding. That's a different experience. It's an emotional experience. Like, oh my God, I've got a technology that I'm going to rip and replace now, and I'm going to onboard. So what do I do here, right? So there, from a content standpoint, are you serving up the right content to make sure that customer has the right onboarding experience? What happens as you make your way through month 6, year 2? That whole emotional experience has changed. Are they still getting the value that they expected out of the purchase 6 months, a year, 2 years down the line? Another emotion. So you go from emotion to emotion, and the content team's got to be able to adjust based on the behaviors of what you're trying to work with on the customer front. And so we're starting to see a lot of that too, right? Where we talk about the traditional funnel, and then you talk about the funnel as it relates to once the customer is a customer. What does that funnel look like? And there's these stages of engagement that have to make its way over to the content side of things. And then how do you think about that rolling into an earned media program, for example, with PR? How do you think about that through tonality across social? What does that look like if you do roundtables and webinars, bringing those experiences into the demand gen side of things? Like, it just, the variety of content now starts to adjust based on the emotion to emotion experience you're trying to put through content.
Yeah. And it brings up a topic that I know that we talked a little earlier about this idea of the voice of the customer, which is this voice of the employee, right? Where we're starting to see a lot more frontline employees, whether it's in the onboarding, customer service, account services, but even, way down deep in that relationship, they're creating these experiences too, right? They're creating, social, they're creating, experiences with interaction with the customer and all of those things. And, one, there's a real power there that in many ways has gone unexploited for a lot of organizations.
Right.
But two, there's a, I don't know if it's a danger is the right word, but certainly the risk in there is that you don't connect any of those experiences. And so you end up empowering employees to make these really cool, interesting decisions for the benefit of the customer and create content and do the thing. But ultimately they're not connected. So they're really hard to, it's really almost impossible to measure and or scale.
Yeah, I mean, the voice of the employee it's an interesting topic right now. We started looking at the convergence of the head of marketing and the head of HR probably a year ago. We started talking about the dynamic between these two roles, how HR leaders need to become marketers, how marketers need to become recruiters and HR leaders, and the dynamic shift in the collaboration between those two departments, which in years past probably wasn't as tight as it is today, and probably not as tight as it's going to be next year. And you think about everything that's happened from the economy over the last 6 to 8 months, and you would think that brands are in a position now to recruit wherever they want to recruit and hire. And that's not the case. It's probably more competitive now than it ever has been for brands to bring in the right level of talent. The voice of the employee has to be one of those key kind of, pillars to help kind of get that culture and that value and that purpose and that vision of the company out there. Because when you're a recruit coming in, you're going to look to see the experience that those employees are having. And sometimes sometimes employees are going to post negative things about a brand. It's how that brand responds to that in a content way that I'm sure future employees are looking at. You know what I mean? Are they changing behavior? Are they listening to that type of feedback? So that's one area. The other area that there's missed opportunities out there that I think brands need to take a closer look at is, how do you bring the employee into the engagement with the VOC? Many of those employees are working on, if I use the example I gave you before, the onboarding. You land a nice anchor account, you onboard them. Well, who's onboarding them? The employee's onboarding them. How do you capture the experience that the employee's having with the new brand? How excited is that employee to work with that new brand? You know what I mean? Like, how connected are they to that new customer? And the VOE, the voice of the employee, starts to bring that through the way at which they engage with that brand they just landed, through social channels and through other elements that we have at our fingertips through the keyboards.
Yeah. I mean, well, it gets back to, this has been something I've been on about for the last 6 or 8 months or so. I went back and looked in 2008, and I was reading up on, I don't know if you've ever read James Heskett's, he called it the service profit chain. And the whole idea of the service profit chain was that the way you create extraordinary customer experiences is that you make employees happy, right? You can, and it wasn't just making them happy like by treating them nice and paying them well, but it was also enabling them with tools that, quite frankly, gave them the power to be able to connect all of these, all those customer experiences, onboarding, servicing, managing, et cetera, to be able to, have the power to be able to do it well, so that they had the insight, right? It wasn't just feeding up into some managerial dashboard, but it was actually giving them the insight into how they were doing, so that they felt empowered in doing it.
Yeah, no question. We're seeing a lot of that too, though, whether it's the opportunities of brands that we're working with or have the potential to work with in the future. The ask coming over to the agency is not only around external comms, but also internal comms. It's kind of like, your brand and the perception of your brand externally is really only as good as the people that help get that brand, positioned out there in a positive way. So, I go back to the marketing and HR and the convergence there. There's a reason for that. I think brands are recognizing what you talked about from '08 and the research and the book that you read back then is very relevant to today. I mean, you think about, rest in peace, the former CEO of Zappos passes away. You read so much of people kind of recognizing, his blueprint of culture, like how he spent so much time on the employees, and that brand, grew to be a wonderful brand. And, culture and the people first mentality is essential today to any brand's DNA. If you just focus externally on selling, and you lose sight of what's going on with the employee side and the people side, you're just going to be faced with a different crisis than you probably weren't prepared for.
Yeah. Well, they called it, back in those days, Heskett talked about the, Scott Cook of Intuit was calling them, creating impossible. It was not good enough to just satisfy customers. You had to create apostles, as he called them, right? So people who would go out and evangelize, and that's, quite frankly, right back around to the beginning of brand marketing again, and going out and creating those apostles who go out and evangelize. And you found it too in in the content fitness report, the one of the last pieces in there is that 40% up from like 26% of marketers are thinking about customer advocacy as part of the second half year's priorities.
No question, no question. Goes back to what we were talking about on the revenue side. The customer life cycle value is far more important to marketers than probably ever before. Mainly because of loyalty, mainly because they see an opportunity to provide more value and eventually translate that to organic growth opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that it's one of the things that we've started to see, and this may be a bridge too far for some marketers, but we've started to see the full evolution of the brand, right? Based on some of the things that we've seen. For example, I know that you guys have worked with Citrix, right? And starting to see how they're not looking at themselves in one particular way, but now because of what's happened over the last 9, 10, 11 months, have started to see themselves as a different idea. You know what I'm talking about?
Totally. It's they were in the midst of, they are a great example of a company that might have focused a little bit on infrastructure and some networking, and now have evolved to be more about employee experience platforms and connectivity and collaboration and what that all looks like through that lens. And you start to see how their content adjusts to Citrix to be remote workforce driven, workforce productivity, future of work, all those areas that are very, very top of mind right now to brands, to industries all over the place. They have, they planned for moving this pivot to brand to the employee experience, but they are right in the heart of this conversation right now. And, seeing wonderful results, both from a brand awareness to conversations, to content consumption, to revenue. They continue to grow in a pretty down market. So it's a great example of these companies now that are starting to, I'm not saying move upstream on audience, but maybe move upstream to a different style of messaging and positioning. Because one of the things, Robert, that came out of the CFR is marketers will be spending much more time on message and positioning, whether it's quarterly, semi-annually or annually, than ever before. And you probably remember in the day you'd set that message positioning, you probably wouldn't look at that thing for 24 months, 36 months. These cats now are looking at message and positioning, once a quarter, if not sometimes tweaking it monthly, based on behaviors and the analytics and the pull-throughs that they can see with regards to how the industry's responding to messaging. And competitively, how you differentiate your competitors out there. It's just, it's a dynamic time to be a marketer, I'll tell you right now, but there's a lot of challenge for them as well.
What story are we telling?
Yeah, so true.
We got to change it. We got to change it up.
Yeah, no doubt.
So Mark, I could talk to you all day about this, us geeking out here on story and brand and content and all of those kinds of things. But for the sake of time here, we'll wrap things up. And just for those, we've mentioned a couple of things here, but most importantly, we've mentioned this content fitness report research. So where can people find that? Where can people find you and the company and get more information and have a deeper conversation with you guys?
Yeah, sure. Pancommunications.com is probably the best place to go. Hit our insights section of the website. You'll see all of our content. Subscribe to our newsletter. You can hit me up on at Mark C. Nardone on Twitter. Love to follow you guys on LinkedIn, back and forth. So any place there. But if you want to kind of check out most of the content and the vibe we have going on with regards to marketing and PR and our industry in general, probably pancommunications.com is the best place to kind of start.
Fantastic. And for all of you out there, I am Robert Rose. I am the Chief Strategy Advisor with the Content Marketing Institute. For anything more on Content Marketing Institute, you can always get that at contentmarketinginstitute.com. Thank you so very much for everything and the wonderful conversation, Mark. And remember, everybody, it's your story. Tell it well. We'll see you soon.
See you, Robert. Right back at you. Thanks.